นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนัมมัสสามิ Blessings. A question that people regularly ask in the monastery is, why was Ajahn Chah such a good teacher? So, obviously he would have to answer that. He's not around anymore, but he would be the best person to answer that question. But just speaking generally, you could say, well, he was somebody who was very sincere in his faith to practice the Buddhist teachings, put them into practice, and practiced for many years, developing his ability with meditation and contemplating the Dhamma to abandon his own mental defilements. And most of his students, if not all his students, I think, believe that he did that. And so later on, when he established his monastery, Wat Nombapong, he would speak from the heart, speak from his experience, and what he said was the truth. He had begun as a junior monk. He did do the usual kind of studies of the suttas and the Vinaya, the Buddhist texts, up to a certain level, but he, like so many other monks, realized that had its limitations. Studying what the Buddha taught alone is not enough to really change your mind, to see the Dhamma, know the Dhamma. You have to practice and in particular develop meditation as well. So that led him to go out and wander through the forests of Thailand, living with great difficulty, but learning how to train his mind to abandon greed, anger and delusion. And then when he started teaching, he was teaching from what he knew, what he had done, but he hadn't forgotten the Buddhist scriptures that he'd learned, but what he was teaching was based on his own practice, following the Buddhist path, but from his own personal experience. And he shared that with people, and he seemed to be very good at not only presenting the Dhamma, but also understanding the people he was talking to, whatever the audience was. Whether it's an individual, a villager, a city dweller, someone with very little education, someone with a lot of education, or later on the monks or people who became monks coming from overseas with their backgrounds. Even then he seemed to understand them quite well and give them Dhamma that was useful for them to see themselves. So he didn't just quote the Buddha, he could quote the Buddha's words, but he also talked from his own experience. And he also established a monastery, although that came about over time. The original Wat Pong he lived in was just forest, literally, that's all it was. It was just forest full of malaria, wild animals, trees, very damp, dark kind of place. And there was nothing there. And he just started with a few monks and novices, and then gradually the community grew up around him, and more buildings and facilities came about over many years. So the monastery you see today, his monastery, you could say, oh, that's a large monastery with a big group of monks, nuns, lay followers, many buildings. But it started as just trees. But it's because of the depth of his Dhamma, the goodness of his Dhamma, the wisdom of his Dhamma, that people were attracted to him. And his own personal practice, they felt he was teaching the things he had actually realized, and not just quoting from other people or the Buddha. So that's, Ajahn Chah, which he's obviously not here today, but you can still read his talks. And as I've said many times, when you read Ajahn Chah's talks, you usually, even if you've read the same talk a dozen times maybe over the years, you always get something new from them. It's refreshing. The taste of Dhamma tastes better than any other taste in the world. We love to watch shows on TV, MasterChef or whatever it is, about cooking. Maybe we should have Master Dhamma and have a show on TV about the Dhamma, and because the Dhamma has the best taste of all, even better than food. When the Dhamma arises in your mind, whether it's the Dhamma of peace, of samadhi, or the insight and the joy of letting go, that can keep you going even to the point where you don't particularly want to eat. I don't know if you've had that experience before, but when piti and sukha, joy arises and your mind's peaceful, sometimes you just don't even want to eat. So the taste of Ajahn Chah's Dhamma is very, I guess you could say, delicious in a Dhamma kind of way. And you always get something new out of his teachings. He's either reminding you of something you might have known but forgotten, or maybe explaining something you hadn't picked up before, hadn't noticed. Because listening to the Dhamma partly depends on your own circumstances and where you're at in your practice. And sometimes you only understand a point of Dhamma at a time when your mind has reached that level in its practice, in its development. And when you first come into the monastery, like the way Ajahn Chah set up his monastery, and his branch monasteries around the world tend to echo that style. He would set up the monastery to help you just settle into the practice and to, in the beginning, just, we say, erode away the strongest kind of coarsest kinds of defilements and causes of suffering that would come up in people's behaviour. When you first come into a monastery, even if you're just a lay visitor for a few days, or somebody intending to become a monk or a nun, you're not expecting to be practicing deep states of samadhi on your first day necessarily. Perhaps a few people have developed samadhi already before they come into the monastery, but it's not many. Most people are newbies, fresh, and so a lot of the teachings and practices you learn are just working on basic attachments to your own desires and attachments that come up all the time in everyday life. So like when I first went to Ajahn Chah's monastery, there's a sign, I'm fairly sure it's still there today, at the front gate. And it's the title of the sign says Den Kaurop, which means like this is a place of respect. Perhaps today you might translate it in Australia as a place of worship, but a place of respect, meaning respect for the Buddha and his teachings. And then a whole list of kind of do's and don'ts about how to behave in the monastery, which some people find intimidating, but it also is helpful. It's giving you a guideline of what the place is and how to practice. And one of the first things on that list, it says, take your shoes off, which very few people do nowadays, because most people ride in a car when they arrive in this or any other monastery, and they drive straight in, often too fast and not very mindfully, because they're coming from the world and they've been whizzing around their hometown or city too fast, too much. Nobody walks into the monastery barefoot. But in those days people did. Many of the villagers would arrive at the gate of the monastery and they'd take their shoes off and carry them in. And monks would as well, because it's actually a rule for Buddhist monks to enter a new monastery barefoot. So if you are wearing shoes, you have to take them off. And you carry them in. We used to do that when I first ordained. And it just sets the tone. You take your shoes off, you're coming into a monastery, you're letting go of some of yourself. Even shoes can be a projection of self. You maybe are really into shoes and fashion, and there's all kinds of people who will tell you that a man or a woman is defined by the footwear they're wearing. Well, as somebody practicing Dhamma, you're going beyond that. So your first area of letting go may be just taking your shoes off. Your shoes don't matter. They literally are just something to protect your feet from the ground, from the weather, from creepy crawlies or from sharp stones or whatever. But even then you take them off out of respect and you walk into the monastery. That's why we were always sweeping the paths, because people would walk around barefoot quite often, and so you wanted to keep the paths clean of leaves so that at least you could see any snakes or creepy crawlies around. And it's nicer to walk on a freshly swept path than if you're barefoot, than through leaves. The last thing you wanted to do was walk through the jungle barefoot, because you very quickly cut your foot or tread on something that bit you. So even from your first step into the monastery, taking your shoes off, you're developing this sense of humility. If you think about it, that's completely going against the way of normal society, where we're always trying to present ourselves as somebody rather than nobody. We're always presenting ourselves in the way we walk, the way we dress, what we say, who we are, who we think we are, and so on. So this can actually be a very profound Dhamma, just a simple little thing like taking your shoes off. I mean, now we don't take them off at the front gate, but we might take them off before we come into the meditation hall. It's symbolic of setting aside, your airs and graces, your sense of self. And many, many of the practices you take on when you come into a monastery are like that. You may not have attained deep states of jhana or insight into the conditioned nature of reality, and you may not be an arahant, but you're just working in a very practical way to let go or shed the outer layers of self. So maybe taking shoes off, coming to a hall, maybe bowing to the Buddha, following the routine of the monastery. As they say, when they sit, you sit. When they walk, you walk. When they clean up, you clean up. When they eat, you eat. Just following the routine and the way of practice in the monastery from day one, you're already letting go of this sense of self. Because obviously at home, you tend not to do that. You tend to eat when you want to, talk when you want to, sleep when you want to, do what you want when you want. That's the lay life, isn't it, if we're honest? Within reason, if you go to work, okay, you have to do what your supervisor says sometimes. But still, generally in the lay life, you're following desires a lot more. And that builds up a sense of self, what nowadays people call ego, but we say a sense of self, attachment, identity, views, opinions, attachments, which leads on to a lot of suffering. But you only see the suffering when some of those freedoms to follow desire are taken away. And that's why when people do come into the monastery, straight away there's a bit of suffering. You eat when they eat, you talk when they talk, you meditate when they meditate. Following a routine, you'll find sometimes you don't want to follow. You want to do something else or do it differently. Why do they do it like this? Why do they do it like that? A lot of very coarse defilements can come up in the beginning of our time in a monastery, even as a lay person. And you'll see people come here or to any other monastery and they'll have their questions and doubts. Why do you do it like this? Why do you eat in a bowl? Why does everyone eat at the same time? Why do you bow in the hall when you come into the hall? Why do you sit still and not talk at certain times? And all these kind of questions. It's bringing up maybe some doubt, but also just awareness that, in a monastery, there's other things at work here, there's other guidelines, other practices that I'm not used to at home. But if you stay on and practice, you usually find you start to appreciate it. You realize why Ajahn Chah did this, because it helps you to see what we call self-identity view. It's the first fetter that anyone following the Buddhist path to enlightenment has to abandon. The view of this body and mind being a self, a solid self, with somebody kind of at the core, this kind of permanent entity at the core of yourself who's guiding everything, controlling, owning everything. And that includes your views and opinions on how things should be. And that's when you come into a monastery and start practicing mindfulness, keeping precepts, meditating. That's one of the first things that you'll come up against, your own attachment to views and opinions and the sense of self. And Ajahn Chah knew that. So he wouldn't say very much. He'd just say, let the monastic practice speak for itself or train you for itself, often without him having to say a word. You know, getting up in the morning, it's very simple. There was a wake-up bell at 3 a.m., which people often feared or hated. But that's just your reaction, that's your opinion. You know, why do we have to get up at 3 a.m.? I maybe have heard that comment 100 times in my life easily, somebody who wasn't happy getting up so early. But that's just the way it is in the monastery. So you might get the answer, oh, it's just the way it is, it's just the way we do it. But what is it that's bringing up that opinion or being annoyed or not liking having to get up at 3 a.m., say? It's a sense of self, isn't it? The wish to follow desires to get up when I want, not when they want. Something that we're all familiar with when we go to work, isn't it? You go to work and there'll be times when you have to do a job or a part of a job that you don't particularly want to do, but you have to do it to keep them happy. Them being maybe your supervisor or your work colleague or the owner of the company or whatever it is. There'll be somebody you call them or they, and you'll be saying, I have to do this to keep them happy, and we're sort of grudging. Then when we go home, we say, I don't have to keep them happy anymore. I can relax and do things my way. What we don't see is that doing things my way is possibly also leading to all kinds of suffering, because we get used to it. And then when there's something comes up that doesn't let us to do things my way, we don't like it, and we suffer. And that happens in monasteries as well. So people come into the monastery, join the routine, join the lifestyle, and straight away they've got this thought, I want to do it my way, but why do I have to do it their way? And maybe they're not happy. And if they're not reflecting, maybe they blame somebody. So blame the teacher. In the old days, Ajahn Chah. In this monastery, maybe they blame me, I don't know. Or blame somebody. Or maybe blame the Buddha, or blame the monastery. So you probably heard that famous reflection of Ajahn Sumedho when he was first at Ajahn Chah's monastery. He had been in a monastery before where they could meditate freely pretty much whenever they wanted. The monks in that first monastery had a lot of time, space, just to do their own thing, which is very nice. But he realized he didn't have much personal discipline, and he needed that. So this was one of the things he was attracted to Ajahn Chah because he realized he needed to have somebody maybe telling him to do things sometimes, or a system where he had to follow the system rather than follow his desires. So when he came to Wabapong, Ajahn Chah's monastery, he had all these reactions coming up. Why are they making me sweep leaves? Why do we have to get up and meditate? Why is there so much chanting? All the sort of normal complaints that most people have, or at least doubts and questions. So he's wandering around grumpy one day, sweeping the leaves, moping and being unhappy, and Ajahn Chah just asked him, is the monastery suffering? And then walked off, just prompting his wisdom. And because Luang Por Sumedho had a lot of wisdom, he quickly understood, the problem is not really the monastery, it's my mind. my attachment to my views and opinions, my sense of self, or what we call ditthi and mana. And you'd hear this teaching over and over again at Ajahn Chah's monastery. Ditthi mana is something you've got to recognize and start letting go of if you want to be peaceful, and if you want to progress in your Dhamma, if you want to be peaceful, if you want to attain jhana, you've got to let go of ditthi mana. You know, a lot of people can say they've attained samadhi, but that's just words. If they're still clinging to their views and opinions and sense of self, it's unlikely they've really attained samadhi. You get to know that if you've trained in a monastic setting, then you start to see what that means. You start to see your own attachment to views and opinions, your own sense of self, and then you see other people's. But you also learn how to erode away this sense of self. Or sometimes they even use the word scrape, the same kind of word you might use to say scrape a really dirty old cooking pot that's really black and greasy, and you have to really scrape and scrub to get the grease off. That's what the monastic setting is doing, and that's what you have to learn in Buddhism. And so a lot of people are afraid of that. They don't want to scrape away their ego and their sense of self because they're so used to protecting it and keeping it. And that's what they love. That's what they love about themselves, and they're always defending it. But that's also why they maybe are not that peaceful, and they still have a lot of stress and suffering. When you do start to scrape away your sense of self and attachment, although it is hard work, just like scrubbing a pan can be hard work. But of course, sooner or later you break through some of the grease and the grime and you see the clean pan underneath. Or you let go of some of your attachment to views and opinions, your ego, your sense of self. You start to see the peaceful mind, the radiant mind shining through. And then maybe you understand, oh, this is what I've got to do. That may take a few painful lessons. You know, anyone who's been in a monastery, even as a layperson, you might have realized, I've had to let go of some sense of self formed over something or other, some opinion, how things should be, what I want the monastery to be, how things should be run, how I should spend my time, whatever. It'll come up, but if you've let go of some of that and you've seen the peace that arises when you finally put your opinion down, set it aside, then you might get it and you understand, oh, this is what I've got to do. You've got to learn to let go. We used to have a joke, we say the best letting go is the painful letting go. Most people want their cake and eat it, don't they? They want to have nice peaceful meditation, relax, go on a retreat or to a monastery, go somewhere, just have their nice peaceful relaxing time and let go and become very wise and enlightened at the same time. But to be honest, there's very few people can achieve it like that, if maybe even nobody. Why? Because we've got all these attachments. We're attached to all these multitude of views and opinions we've been collecting. We're all collectors over the years, a sense of self, who I am. You know, we're defined by what we like, what we don't like, our preferences, our habits. And it builds up into this strong sense of self, and then often we're comparing with other people, whether you're in a monastery or just at home or at work. How much of your time you spend looking at other people, comparing yourself with them? Who's got more money? Who knows more? Who's better? Who's worse? Who knows less than me? Who has less influence or power than me? Who's got less money than me? Who looks better than me, who's more attractive than me, who's more ugly than me, who's more ugly. Endless comparing with other people. And we don't realize what we're doing is filling our mind up with all kinds of views, opinions, and the sense of self. As soon as you come into a monastery, that is dropping away, like from day one. You take your shoes off, you pick up the broom, or you come to the hall and do your meditation. All of that starts to drop away instantly. And some people are not used to that. It's too confronting, too difficult. Oh, I can't do this. I can't let go of my sense of self. I'm, dressing very simply, wearing white, or wearing robes as a monk, shaving your head, or even as a lay person, just wearing sort of simple white clothes maybe. Eating my food at one time on a plate, everything together. Even that brings up stuff, doesn't it? Some people, they come to the monastery, they can't put their sweet on the same plate as their main course. They have to have a second plate, which is very impractical in a monastery where there's a large number of people, only a limited number of utensils and plates and so on. That's just a worldly way of doing things. That's your ego, your views and opinions coming out there. I've got to have a different plate for each course and have a whole range of things around. You can do that at home, sure, but then that's just following your desires, isn't it? In the monastery, you learn to eat in one dish, and that will bring up a lot of resistance, won't it? What is that resistance? It's views and opinions, the way things should be done. One lady once came to the monastery and had to eat everything on one plate. She was so upset, all the food on the plate, she just tipped it up on the ground and stormed off. All it is food kindly offered by various donors for people's well-being, and yet it brought up that much self. It can do that. This is what we call ditthimana. Monks have it, lay people have it, nobody is immune from this, nobody's better or worse. We all have it, it's just it may come out in different ways. If you really want to attain jhana and deep insight, samatha vipassana, all the stuff you've heard about, read about, this is what you've got to deal with. Your basic daily sense of self that will come up, views and opinions, what's right, what's wrong, what you like, what you don't like. You've got to deal with that. You've got to have enough mindfulness to see it and let it go. And I guess Ajahn Chah is such a popular teacher because not only did he explain that very well, but he also gave people methods and places of practice and a system of practice that helps you to do that. It's not always quick, letting go of self is probably a lifetime's work for everyone. Who knows? Maybe many lifetimes' work. We love to read the suttas and the stories about monks and nuns and lay people in the time of the Buddha, and they hear one talk and everything drops away. Sounds great, and if it can happen, good luck. But I don't think it happens for very, very often for people. You may have moments where some of your defilements drop away quite quickly. When you have that moment of insight where you realize you've been attaching to some opinion and it's causing you a lot of unhappiness or conflict with other people, and then finally you decide, I'm going to let go of this one. So you have your small moments of realization. But for everything to drop away just like that is unlikely to happen with one Dhamma talk. But if you keep working away at it, you keep scouring and eroding and cleaning up your mind through the practice, then of course, little by little, it will, your sense of self will drop away. But you have to be patient. Another one of Ajahn Chah's great things was, he said, if you just keep going, you don't stop, you don't give up, it'll happen. You'll get there. You'll let go of self. How quickly, how slowly, there's many factors will determine that. No one maybe can really predict that. But if you don't stop, you keep practicing, it will happen. So if you want the sure way to progress in the Buddhist path, because that's another question everyone likes to ask, when will I become enlightened? How long will it take? When will I get samadhi? This is the way. Erode away your attachment to views and opinions, sense of self, conceit, and you'll achieve it. But you have to be patient enough, you have to be willing to work with yourself. And of course, some people are not ready for that, that's understandable. And what do you cherish most in the world? You may say, my husband, my wife, my parents, my children, my friends, my house, my car, my this, my that. But all of that is still second place to this sense of self. Like when the queen was asked by the king in the time of the Buddha, who do you love most? And the king is hoping for this answer, you, my lord, or whatever she was supposed to say. And she says, myself, I don't love you the most in the world. The king goes into a fit of rage. Why does he go into a fit of rage? Because he's heard the truth for the first time. He thought she was, stuck on him, full of adoration and love for him, and she might well have been as well, but she also was admitting she loved herself the most, and that's the truth, isn't it? So the king wants a second opinion, goes to the Buddha. She said that she loves herself more than me, and the Buddha said, that's right, that's correct. Because the queen was actually more advanced in her practice. She understood this better than the king, who was still very stuck on his position, status, wealth, power. Understandably, if you were a king, I were a king, we'd probably all be getting lost in that stuff. But his wife, no, she understood the Dhamma better. She understood, this is all superficial. The real thing you're attached to is your 5 khandhas, your body, your feelings, your thoughts, your sense of self. That's our number one attachment. So the king got a good lesson, because when the Buddha backs up his wife, he realizes, oh, my wife is quite smart. So a blow to the patriarchy or whatever, king had to accept that his wife is a smart person. And that's the Dhamma. The Dhamma is not restricted to anyone, young, old, male, female, whoever. Anyone who practices the Dhamma, develops insight, lets go of any kind of self, ditthi-mana, they're gaining the Dhamma, they're gaining true wisdom, true intelligence. Or they're using their intelligence to its best ends. Unfortunately, we don't teach this much in schools and universities and society. You have to come to a Buddhist monastery maybe and listen to the teachings of the Buddha to understand this kind of system of education, you might say. But ultimately it's the best one because it brings you freedom, true freedom of mind, true peace of mind. It ends all conflicts. Nowadays everyone's complaining, so many conflicts in the world, war here, conflict there, problem here, problem there. True. Where does it all come from when you boil it down or reduce it down? People attaching to the sense of self, identifying with themselves, their group, maybe their country or their religion or their political group or their economic group. We attach with this sense of self, and that leads to conflict. Even in monastery it will happen, won't it? My view, your view, people have their disagreements, sometimes even in a Buddhist monastery. People will attach to things, so it's my space in the meditation hall, not your space, this is my space. It's always funny when people do that, because you come to a meditation retreat to let go, and already people are attaching to their cushion and their corner, and this is my place, not yours. Or my spot. It can happen at the kitchen sometimes. People have their spot where they sit to eat their food. It's not your spot, it's my spot. So even in monasteries we do this. And, at home, obviously my home, my this, my that. At work, my field of influence, my job, this is my job, not your job. Or someone tries to give you their job because they want to get out of it. No, this is not my job, this is your job. I didn't work much before I was a monk, but I had a few jobs, temporary jobs, and one of them was coloured by the fact I was working in a kitchen, the biggest kitchen in London at the time. I don't know if it is now. It's the kitchen for Government House. The Central London Council had a massive building with a huge kitchen that was like half a kilometre long, and you'd have little buggies to drive from one end to the other. So it's a massive kitchen. And I was at one end washing up every day to earn some extra money. So I just spent my whole day washing up plates and big cooking pots. Wasn't a very nice job, but I just got on with it because I wanted to earn some money. I was only 16. And then somebody at the other end was doing the same job down the other end, and he was a lot older than me, and so sometimes he'd drive a little buggy up full of dirty plates and stuff and say, "Oh, this is yours to do." And I said, hold on, this is yours. And he would argue and say, "No, it's your job." And because I was younger, I'd always lose the argument and have to do his work as well as mine, so he could end up going home early. That's life, isn't it? We have the sense of self, and then we push things we don't like onto other people, push our own opinions, push our painful feelings onto others. We complain, we tell them off, push our work onto them, our duties, our responsibilities. You do it, I don't want to do it. Where's that all coming from? It's coming from ditthi and mana, sense of self. Why do we feel peaceful when we meditate? Because we start to let it go. What's the best kind of letting go, at least in the beginning? Samadhi. When you cultivate samadhi, mindfulness directed to an object, such as the breath or any of the other objects, what happens? You have to let go of your attachment to your views, your opinions, your preferences, what you like, what you don't like, and you just start letting go. If you really stay with the breath long enough, the views and opinions go quiet, don't they? Your mind starts to go quiet. The chatter, the complaints, the desires, the fantasies start to go quiet. Not always, and that's probably a sign your effort maybe is not there, or there's something you're getting stuck on. But sometimes it might work, and you really come calm by fixing your mind on the breath to the point where all the other stuff just arises, ceases, arises, ceases. You may still have thoughts and feelings and sense of self arising, but you're not holding on anymore. You're letting them go. This is another teaching of Ajahn Kalyano. He said, you may have your opinions and your views, just don't hold on to them so tightly that they cause you or other people suffering. To not hold on tightly means to have enough mindfulness and awareness to see what you're doing with your mind and to let go. Literally, when you hold on tightly to something, it hurts, doesn't it? Everyone has a mobile phone nowadays. If you hold your phone for too long, too tightly, your fingers hurt. So you have to put it down. Even if you love your phone, you can't hold it forever. Views, opinions, this sense of self is the same. You have your sense of self. It's almost impossible not to use it because you live in the world. And you have to think and you have to make decisions and interact with the world. But don't hold on so tightly that it leads you into conflict with others, arguments, and so on. Learn how to put it down. And in meditation, you're learning how to put it down. And that's why you get a rest. And that's why you feel very peaceful. Even if you attain samadhi, what happens is, like a kind of monster in the movie, your attachment to self will come back up again. So you attain some peace, the mind is happy, peaceful, calm, which is good. And then the monster kind of returns and says, that's my thing, I own this samadhi, this happiness. So even that you have to be careful of. We attach to the idea, I have samadhi, or I am peaceful, I know the Dhamma. Conceit and views can form around even the good things that we practice in Dhamma. But generally speaking, we have to learn to let go of it. And the more successfully you do that, you put things down, the quicker your mind becomes peaceful. Your mind becomes brighter, happier, content. All these things don't matter so much, other people's opinions, all the sort of externals of life, the superficial things, who you think you are, how much you earn, where you live, who you know, all the kinds of suffering, competing with other people. You can set all that aside, and that's why you get a good rest. Just go to the breath, and your mind becomes very peaceful if you're with the breath. So all of this is I'm just giving you a taste of what Ajahn Chah taught and how he would pass what he understood on to others, how he'd encourage people to develop mindfulness, learn to reflect back on themselves, to understand the causes of suffering, where they're holding on too tightly, where the suffering is coming from. This is what he would encourage, whether you're in a monastery, you're at home, doesn't matter, you can practice this anywhere. Maybe I'll just say this much for the moment, and afterwards there'll be a chance for you to ask your questions.